our lives from day to day, but the love and memory of you shall never pass away. On behalf of the Department of History, ARSD College, I, Resham Jha, warmly welcome you to today's gathering to honor and celebrate the lives of one of the most renowned professors in our community, whose loss was a blow to the academic institution of history, late Professor D.N Jha and Professor Sunil Kumar. Professor Dwijendra Narayan Jha was one of the most erudite and prolific scholars on ancient and medieval Indian history. An alumnus of Presidency College, Calcutta, he moved to Patna University for his postgraduate and doctoral degrees. He had a brilliant academic career and reached the summit of it before he was 40. No mean achievement by itself, but in point of fact, the least of his accomplishments. He published his doctoral dissertation in 1967 under the title Revenue System in Post-Maurya and Gupta Times. It was molded in the best empirical traditions of Indological scholarship and also represented important shifts in perspective that were transforming the writing of early Indian history. He went on to make notable and well-noticed interventions in a number of other areas in early Indian histories, writing essays on temples as landed magnates and on merchants and temples in early medieval South India, critiquing Bertenstein's account of peasant state and society in Indian history, historicizing in Hindu identity, and so on. A historian whose work on India's ancient past often found its way into its polarized present, Professor D.N Jha was never afraid to speak his mind. There are many more essays and books that have contributed immensely to the scholarship of ancient India. While no amount of enumeration of his works can convey the generosity, humility, and integrity, certainly the life of the mind of a man who was daring enough to challenge those in power can and needs to be mapped. He sought to bring the disprivileged into the historical canvas, and he will be missed by the fraternity of historians as well as by those who believe in the idea of a secular and inclusive India. Professor Sunil Kumar was a leading historian of medieval India who had worked extensively on the Delhi Sultanate and wrote about its political and administrative history, social formations, architectural past, and religious mystical networks. He held a number of prestigious positions. Between 2008 and 2010, he was a reader at the Department of History in the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. In 2008, he had served as the Townsend Professor in Residence in the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies, University of California at Berkeley. His sudden death is a great and a painful loss to the academic community. His scholarship reflected a passionate commitment to understanding the social and political realities of South Asia through an exploration of its medieval past that corresponded with the highest standards of professional rigor and originality. His historical analysis was communicated in magnificent prose, meticulously worked arguments, and carefully accumulated material through extensive immersion in the world of Persian literature and historiography. He raised new questions about how the time period between the 13th and the 16th centuries needed to be situated within the broader history of India and the Islamic world. His intimate connection with Delhi gave his exploration of the historical and literary core of South Asian medieval studies a sharpness and confidence, and convinced his readers of having arrived at something close to the truth of its past, and this is his everlasting legacy. I would now like to introduce the speakers for today. The first speaker for today is Dr. Pankaj Jha, who is an associate professor in the Department of History in Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi. In 2013 and 14, he was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship for doctoral work in University of Texas at Austin, USA. In 2016, he was awarded a bursary from the European Research Council to travel to Warsaw, Poland, to present a paper in the European Conference for South Asian Studies, and in 2019, a month-long postdoctoral research fellowship at Leibniz Zentrum Moderner Orient, Berlin. Some of his publications are A Political History of Literature, Vidyapati and the 15th Century in 2019, and The Servant's Pasts, Volume 1 in 2019 itself, co-edited with Nitin Sinha and Nitin Verma. The topic that Sir will be speaking today is the past in our present. I would request Sir to kindly deliver his talk.
Thank you, Resham. Am I audible?
So your voice is a little low.
Okay. I'll speak a little loudly. Am I audible better? Is it better now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Resham, for those introductions, particularly for the introductions of Professor D.N Jha and Professor Sunil Kumar. There's no other way for us who are left behind, his students, his colleagues, and his, in fact, the students, colleagues, friends, and admirers of both the scholars who are not amongst us now. There's no other way for us to celebrate their scholarship, their lives, but to talk about academics, to talk about what was most closely cherished by them, that is history. And that is why I think the entire academic community of Delhi is grateful to the history department of ARSD College for having organized this in honor of and to celebrate these two great scholars. I was listening to you and also thinking particularly about my association with one of them, Professor Sunil Kumar. Like many thousands of students that he has left behind, I was one of them, one of those who learned from him. I also had the privilege of working very closely with him for more than a decade, partly because of the fact that I was co-editing a journal with him. Uh, and one of the things I learned from him was the rigor of research at any cost. The rigor that many a times cost him years and years of hard work without having anything to show on his CV. Many of us are rightly and legitimately overwhelmed by the scholarship, the extensive scholarship of Professor Sunil Kumar. But those who knew him more closely would know that he thought of himself as a novice, as someone who was still a work in progress, as someone who was still learning, as someone in whom there was scores of history still left. And hence it is all the more shocking for us to now sit here and commemorate, forced to commemorate his memory. He thought of his own work as always a work in progress. He thought that uh, much of the work that he needed to do and he could do and he must do was still to be done. There are numerous manuscripts of books and unpublished articles that he has left behind and that hopefully should come out sometime in future with some additional help. But today, I'm going to talk a little about something which was a theme which was very dear to him. In the process of supervising his students' works, as well as in the process of his own historical writings, one thing that always worried him, and he was perpetually anxious about it, was why history? Why should anyone be interested in knowing what Alauddin Khalji did 600 years ago? what is the use of history in present? How is it that we can understand our present better, probably intervene in our present more effectively by knowing our pasts? And that's why, tellingly, the name of one of his books was The Present in Delhi's Pasts. And as you can make out, the title of my talk is a kind of spin off from this title, where I call it The Past in Our Presence. The reason why I chose this topic is because, as he often pointed out, it's only in modern times that historians have started taking up slices of time somewhat arbitrarily from our past and writing about it, producing historical scholarship about it, without ever bothering to clarify why someone at present should actually be interested in such a scholarship. He never tired of pointing out that the pre-modern historians, whether it was Kalhan or Badauni, whether it was Abul Fazl or Ziauddin Barni, were actually celebrities in their own lifetime. And this is not because of the decline of history as a discipline per se, that historians are no longer recognized, but because of the fact that when Abul Fazl wrote a history, or when Akalhan picked up his stories of past, they would they might start anywhere in the past, but they would always bring the story up to the present. They were not scared of saying things, even when they were taking on, sometimes like Badawi, they were taking on the powers that be, or maybe they were paying their obeisance to the rulers and accepting their patronage conditions. But the interesting thing is, the relevant part for us is the fact that they always brought the story up to the present. We historians have stopped doing so. There are some good and there are some bad reasons for that. And sometimes I remember having very long, protracted, heated discussions with Professor Sunil Kumar on why this should be so. But today I'm going to talk about some of the ideas that I have had occasions to share and discuss with him, which is part of an upcoming project that I'm doing, which is about the the ways in which we understand history in the popular domain. The ways in which we understand history in the popular domain is not entirely unrelated to what happens in the academics, but it also has an independent trajectory of its own. It's an area on which academics don't write, they don't think about it, they publish their erudite scholarly works uh, with long, extensive footnotes, without ever bothering to find out what exactly is the afterlife of the insights that they have produced in the domains outside the immediate circuit of specialists. Uh, and the best way to start thinking about this issue is to first of all come to terms with the fact that the word history is actually used in very many different ways by historians as well as by amateurs, informed citizens, and people at large. The word is used, for example, to refer to a vague sense of collective memory. Sometimes it is referred to knowledge about past, equally vague. Uh, Sometimes it is referred to as a subject that you study in order to ensure that you get a degree. And it doesn't matter what subject you're studying, history is one of the subjects, and you study it. Uh, in many ways, these are overlapping understandings of history. But history is also sometimes taken to mean a certain kind of method, a certain craft, a craft of producing knowledge about present, about past, about society and its complexities, And it is in this sense of craft that, for example, historians like uh, E.H. Carr wrote their books, What is History? Or someone like uh, Mark Bloch would write their historian's craft. They did not talk about what exactly is history. They rather talked about uh, the best way in which professional historians can write history. That's what they called what is history. But the question of what is history is far more complicated and perhaps fundamental than the kind of questions raised by uh, scholars like Mark Bloch or E.H. Carr or Arthur Marwick and a host of other philosophers of history. I would like to submit that the word is used in different overlapping ways, and we must, and we can map the overlapping meanings of this word. So one sense is that of knowledge about past. The other sense is the discipline of history and all the methods that it connotes. For example, the fact that uh, historical knowledge is produced with close attention to space, time, human agency, and context. The fact that we try and imagine pasts with close attention to what is possible and what is not possible in past. So, for example, uh, a sense of history is informs everyone's judgment at one level. If I say that Akbar was very backward technologically because he did not know how to use a mobile phone, it's quite obviously an anachronistic idea. Uh, and everyone understands it. You don't need to have a keen sense of history in order to know this. But there are other similar examples of anachronism, of application of time in a manner which is discrepant. Uh, and those are very subtle ways in which one can look at past, make these anachronistic mistakes and not realize it. But most often these are not so obvious and very difficult to pinpoint. So historical method, however, goes beyond this simple, beyond what this simple anachronistic example can actually produce. And these are also historically debated among scholars, how best to produce historical knowledge. But there is another sense in which history is used even more superfluously, and that is a sense of history being a repository of knowledge about past, sometimes interesting, sometimes boring knowledge, sometimes relevant, sometimes irrelevant knowledge. So quiz masters, for example, relish scandalous facts. They would relish the fact that CIA of United States of America once fancied that they could actually turn enormous amounts of water from Mediterranean Sea into the Sahara Desert and make it much more inhabitable. Uh, we have these scandalous or lightning facts uh, that can be put together in a book form in a quiz book. This is a tourist guide oriented kind of sense of history, where if you visit Taj Mahal, guides come to you and offer to tell you the history of Taj Mahal, meaning that they will tell you some right or wrong quote unquote facts about Taj Mahal. However, history also is used in the word history is also used to refer to something far more profound, serious, palpable, and tangible. This is the sense of history as a burden, as a force. So, for example, when I say that I have short hair and my sister has long hair, then there is one kind of difference. When I say I have hair on my face and my sister does not have hair on my face, that's another kind of human difference. In this case, it's biology that my sister doesn't have hair on her face and I have hair on my face. When I refer to the fact that I have short hair and my sister has long hair, I'm referring to history. When a middle class man is found cooking in his kitchen and his mother sees him cooking, the pain that she shows on her face is the burden of history that she is carrying. The fact that the man still wants to cook because he doesn't think that it's especially if he's married, he doesn't think that it is always his spouse's duty, a woman's duty, to cook. uh, he has a different idea about gender division of labor, and the fact that he's unable to give up cooking even though his some of his family members object to it. That's the burden of history that he is engaging with. In many ways, at every moment of our present lives, we are dealing with the burden of history. We are dealing with the burden of history when we do things which many people think are not things to be done. Uh, in other words, what I'm trying to suggest here is that when we think of the discipline of history simply uh, beyond it being a repository of information or a formal discipline in which you can acquire a degree, but think of it in terms of a certain sensibility, a certain craft of looking at past and understanding present, of understanding the fact that the present is what it is because of things that has happened in past, something that medical practitioners understand pretty well. When we are imbued with this sensibility of what we may call the historian's eye, that then we are in a better position to deal with the burdens of history. And those burdens are multiple. Those burdens crisscross. Those burdens can make our life hell. Those burdens can be dealt with, can be engaged with, so long as we understand that there are certain things which may appear natural, God given, or immutable to us. But a study of history suggests that those are not natural, those are human made conditions, and hence they would bear with human intervention, and it is possible to challenge and alter those conditions. That is the takeaway from history in a way which is not simplistic, which is not which doesn't work like a toolkit for that the discipline of history gives you, but a long protracted struggle which can only be undertaken collectively. Let me read out from a very intriguing, interesting line from the introduction to uh, Professor Sunil Kumar's one of Professor Sunil Kumar's books. In the very beginning, in the introduction, on page 14, he says, "The pasts of the subcontinent are a threat to the manner in which some would want to shape its present." Uh, so basically, what he's suggesting, as you can make out, is that uh, when we engage honestly with the past of this subcontinent and present the and share its results, we are we become a threat to some of the presentist quote unquote political projects going on. But he also warned against any simplistic notion in forming our presentist politics. He goes on to say it was a rich heritage. He's talking about the heritage of Delhi and the subcontinent. It is a rich heritage, but an embarrassing, dangerous one for a modern audience looking for simple linear correlations between the past and the present, to legitimate narrow presentist interests. In other words, uh, what what Professor Kumar tried to underline here is the fact that while it's extremely important for us to cultivate an historian's eye for details, an historian's eye for context, a historian's eye to make a distinction, to be able to make a distinction between that which is human made and that which is not, it's equally important that in our rush to find usable pasts, we do not make simplistic, linear causative linkages. It's important take into take into account the complexities of this knowledge formation and to present it in all its details, to stick to empirical facts, even when we might be aiming for profound truths. And that was an extremely important aspect of the scholarship that Professor Kumar produced. So, as he used to say, the actual production of knowledge is always dialogical, and hence, monologues should be kept to minimum. So I would stop here and hope that there would be
Sir, has your video stuck?
It's on mute, Resham.
Oh, okay. I would like to thank Sir for sharing his extensive knowledge and his experiences with us. And now we'll move on to the second speaker. So our second speaker for the day is Dr. Shankar Kumar, who is an assistant professor in the Department of History in Hindu College, Delhi University. He has earlier worked with the Confederation of Indian Industry, which is the apex industry chamber in India. He has been awarded the Junior Research Fellowship by the University Grants Commission, and he chose to reconnect with the subject which has always fascinated him, which is history. And he completed his MPhil and subsequently his PhD from the Department of History, University of Delhi. Among the list of publications by him are included co-authored books like Frank Concise Social Sciences and co-edited books like Indian History and Culture. He has delivered more than 70 EduSat lectures on history and Indian culture that were nationally televised live by the CEC, which is an inter-university center of UGC on electronic media. These EduSat lectures are also recorded and their transcripts are published on YouTube. He has also featured as resource person and expert on several television programs like History in the Eyes of Historians on Lok Sabha TV and Epic Ke Das on Epic Channel. He was also the deputy director of the Non-Collegiate Women's Education Board in the year 2013. Sir's topic for today is D.N Jha, the person and his writings. I would request Sir to address the gathering.
Thank you, Resham. I need a little bit of affirmation from your side if the voice quality is okay, and
Yes,
so is
sir.
the video quality. Okay, thank
Yes.
you. Dear colleagues, I can see quite a few familiar faces, friends. Of course, I'm visualizing their faces by their names. Not all are available on video, but yeah. Thank you, Ajit, for reaching out to me, and I can now see Dr. Vishwa Mohan Jha the prodigal pupil of Professor D.N Jha, and his sheer presence adds a lot of I would say seriousness to any academic transactions that happen. I really remember long years back at Atma, he was making some presentation in the presence of, I think it was Professor Bisht and R.S. Sharma as well. And Professor Bisht was perhaps talking about archaeological findings at Dholavira. And ever since, whenever I went to Professor D.N Jha's house and at his study, he would almost hidingly but triumphantly, make his students visible to me. Of course, Dr. Vishwamohan Jha, who's rated in his esteem very high. Professor Jaya Tyagi's PhD submission had taken place around the time when I had just become his student. I used to ask him, can I have a look at their thesis and so forth? And he would, those of us who have seen him would understand the facial gesture by which he would communicate more than his verbal, articulations. So it would be like, hey, that's okay. But he would take tremendous pride in bright students in the hand. And that was one of the subtle ways by which he would motivate. He was not given to telling things on his own, but if you really persisted with something, then he would deliver. Old-fashioned, armchair, disciplined historians are like that. I just heard Dr. Pankaj speak eloquently on Professor Sunil Kumar. Those of us who are aware of the departmental, groupings would understand that it wasn't a kind of very seamless way in which the two giants, I would say, of history department would interact, but they had very healthy respect for each other. And even Shahid Amin wouldn't generally agree with Professor Jha's proposition, nor would Professor Jha agree with quite a few propositions of him. But when I saw, as a young student, I saw them meet, it really kindled something in you, a very healthy respect for scholarship across the frame within which you write and so forth. Now, since I'm supposed to speak on his personality and his works, both, I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of the details that constituted the work of an empiricist. He was an empiricist par excellence. At the same time, he was a public intellectual, I would say. Very often you could see him sitting in Sehmat office. And I'll come to that later. As a person, I met him in the late 1990s. By that time, he had virtually started to prepare himself for the impending retirement. So I would say that I did not meet him at his prime, but certainly I had a glimpse of a very accomplished scholarship that he embodied. And he would, if you just look at his career progression, right? For example, the year of his graduation at presidency, the year of his post-graduation at Patna University, his PhD, his becoming a lecturer, moving to Delhi University as a reader, and then eventually going on to become a professor and so forth. You know, that sense of discipline is very much evident. So there is no gap, and he is seamlessly moving moving up the hierarchy. And this, of course, progression was punctuated by many health issues that he had. Serious health issues, heart disorder, and several other issues. And yet, he displayed fair degree of discipline in writing a book, meeting the deadlines. I have seen him tense just because he is fast approaching a publisher's deadline, which of course, as students, we would think that his name was good enough to recalibrate those submission dates and so forth. But you take it seriously, and I could understand as to why he was taking that much of pressure of academics and writing into his mind, because, and now here I come to his works. You know, I once asked him, I had done my post-graduation from JNU, and as Resham just mentioned, I had, also worked at Confederation of Indian Industries and so forth. It was only subsequent to this that I came back to do my MPhil from DU. So I would ask him how to go about it. I mean, do you have a specific methodology that I need to pursue, or any particular way in which I need to think over the matter that I study otherwise as a student, from a book, from a research paper, from some source material, some archaeological document, and so forth? His prescriptions were very simple. He would say, and at that point of time, I couldn't quite fathom it as to what he has in mind. He would say, computers by that time had just become popular, and he was very good at it. He would say whole sort method. What is this? I have never come across this term, whole sort method. HOLE, whole, SORT, sort. He would say, so I wanted him to elaborate. To say, pick up a word, pick up a term, whatever literature that you come across or come around that, you use a pin or something and just go on collecting whatever you read around a particular theme at one place. So you insert a pin into a hole, and that is what hole sorting is. So that when you actually sit to write, you have all the variants and variations and nuances associated with a particular concept or with a particular word, its semantics, its several other facets at one place. And that will allow you to do another prescription that he offered to me, and that is grow. So how do you, I said, how do I process it? I mean, yeah, this is a very physical way of, collecting facts. And so what do I do? Where do I exercise, and how do I exercise my historical imagination to this? Let's say the grow, right? Grow, mull over it. Close your eyes and just grope over it. Simple things, but I tell you, they can take you miles deep into what is actually understood as historical imagination, right? Pankaj Jha was just speaking about anachronistic slippages in several of the writings that we at times inadvertently fall into. If you grow, if you think about the times, if you visualize the times that you're writing about, in terms of whatever information, historical information, in terms of possibilities and impossibilities that you have, you can avoid this. You can avoid this death trap for a historian, I would say, right? Being anachronistic, being chronology-wise not consistent, making cross-cultural comparisons where they are not called for, where they are not warranted, are some of the things that a historian should certainly resist against. And those of us who casually do it at our own peril. So what I could get is that you not spend lot many words and fancy phrases to express something that underlies historical scholarship. And that is something that is very evident in his writings. His writings are, he uses good English. At one, Arya Sharma was his guru, with whom he stuck all through, academically, socially, at several levels, in personal capacity as well. And one time he casually said to me, कि शंकर आप देखिए आर्य शर्मा का जो भी ये पर्टिकुलर किताब, perhaps he was referring to material culture, material formation and material milieu वाला जो किताब है, इसे कि अगर इसको आप कंप्यूटर में डाल दें पूरे वर्ड्स को, I think there are not more than 500 words that he uses. That's the limited range of English vocabulary with which the man wrote, and what a book he wrote, right? And he had an eye for that kind of writing, which could reach out to the intended audience. And no wonder his outline of ancient India went on to assume that popularity. And so did his co-edited volume in Hindi, published by Hindi Karyanvan Nideshalay Prachin Bharat Ka Itihas. D.N Jha acquired celebrityhood in his 30s. Celebrityhood coming to an academician's, more particularly a historian in his 30s, is a rare feat. It boiled him up. When I met him, he was academically, or his public persona was on retreat. I saw him vehemently seeking to reclaim his audience. At one other seminar, or in fact, it was a meeting, I heard some professors speak about this transition that usually happens to a Marxist historian born of the times that Professor D.N Jha also was born in, 1940s, 1950s, and so forth. You do see this trend, as is the general historiographical trend of Marxist writing, that your fascination with economy and society slowly gives way to the cultural manifestations of it. So cultural Marxism is what you ultimately gravitate towards. But beyond this broad transition that is exemplified by several other Marxist historians, I saw Professor D.N Jha making this transition not because of the trend, but because he was seeking that audience that he once had. So he wrote about issues that are provocative. I saw him writing that Holy Cow book. I was very closely associated when he was doing his research for that. Then he went on to write Mind Over Matter, then alcoholic drinks and so forth. These are the ways by which, picking up elements from there, he wanted. Another trait of his writing is that he would puncture the arguments which are mainstreamish arguments. He's not getting into the narrow lanes of periphery or peripheral assertions of very local things. As a student, he was shaped in the 1960s, 1970s, or maybe 1950s. That was the time when the approach was pan-Indian, right? And that is something that stayed with him all through. If I were to just read the names of the monographs, and I keep telling my students, one of the research projects that they can undertake is to just look at the historical PhD researches that has happened at this department in Delhi University, or you can go to JNU, right from say 60s down to the present times. The sheer title, comparison of the titles will give you an insight into the historiographical trends and also historical scholarship. How from pan-India you move to regional histories or local histories and so forth, right? So whether it is revenue system in post-Maurya and Gupta times, right? So the pan-Indian, impact is very visible. Studies in early Indian economic history, economy and society in early India, issues and parent, the myth of the holy cow, and even in the edited books, of course, edited books would carry several studies which have pertinence to a particular region or locality and so forth. But there was that seductive charm that sucked him, and that was to get into the mainstream pan-Indian narrative that is built by what I'd say was the nationalist history till 1950s and 60s. Of course, D.D. Koshambi, R.S. Sharma were the initial busters of this. And Professor D.N Jha's commitment to this ideological allegiance is unquestionably carried all through his scholarship down to the 21st century. These are not easy things. You didn't see him wavering. He continued to remain one of the rare specimen exhibiting this trait. It could have been normal till say 1980s, but to maintain that position in the 1990s, in 2000 and thereafter was not easy, yet he did it, displaying a lot of courage also. And people would say that he's doing it to gain, some kind of, to create some kind of an optics and so forth. A historian deserves it. A scholarship which is so empirical, which is so hard done, needs an audience. And a person who has already been a celebrity, a celebrated history writer, very legitimately should look for it, right? So there's this post-truth, fragmentation of audience, or creating this optics that, okay, there aren't much readers for what is very assiduously and meticulously worked out historical monographs, pains a historian. I could see that pain in him. So when we do make such efforts like the one that you are doing post his death, we are seeking to talk about him, talk about his works. It's a tremendous tribute. It's a rightful tribute that should go to a historian of that kind. These are some of the things. Then, as I said, that he would also broach issues of topical concern. People who were historians, who were his contemporaries, they are also doing it. Over the last 2 decades, you would find Irfan Habib also writing about ancient India, also going on to write about modern India, right? So if D.N Jha, in that Indian History Congress general session where he was presiding, he wrote about that Hindu identity. Basically, he was writing about 18th and 19th century politics, right? Of course, he would deduce quite a few punches or use quite a few punches from ancient India and early medieval India. But basically, he was delving into the polemics that characterized 18th and 19th century scholarship and also movements and so forth. that trudging across time when you have mastered a particular you can say timeline is so wonderful, right? We are given into this temptation, having not mastered a particular timeline of history. We tend to be seduced by the charm of getting into the polemics and getting into the topical concerns and so forth, because it gives us it helps creating some kind of a buzz. It does good ego massage for whatever we are writing. But if that is sans the kind of silent, diligent, invisible effort that has gone into an empirical, even if empirical collection of facts, just think of it. Nilkant Shastri's work. Of course, no one would tell you today to read Nilkant Shastri's book to get an understanding about South India, history of South India. There are several other fanciful segmented state and several other theories. But, entire pith and substance is already there. Just look at those facts. I mean, they are the repositories for future historians. Look at the works of K.M. Srimali. He's working on the glossary. He's working on things that are specific terms and putting them together. These are masterly works. These are the works of the maestros. D.N Jha saw him serving that cause. And it was so wonderful to have a glimpse of that slice of old-fashioned history writing and the diligence that it required. To see them live was wonderful. It was very instructive. It was ennobling. It was ennobling because every time I get sucked into the charm of doing fanciful pop history, which I admit I do, I'm reminded of them in my memory as someone who is instructively telling me to go and check the facts, go and check it from the empirical perspective. Do you have enough strength of facts in your punches? And so long as any historian of present generation is sensitive and aware of this, courtesy the historians of the kind that D.N Jha was, it would go on serving the cause of historical scholarship with aplomb. So with these words, I would stop, and I hope that there are observations, questions that I would like to answer to the best of my ability, or even discussion that can follow. I'm sorry, there are quite a few names that I couldn't take, but certainly it would add value if to this event if faculties also at ARST College speak and discuss and give their opinions. Thank you.